In the quiet village of Amici, there was a man named Obiora who did something very strange. He laughed at funerals. While others cried, Obiora would laugh loudly, as if he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. His laughter wasn't nervous or soft. It was deep and uncontrollable. The villagers didn't understand him. "How can someone laugh at such a sad time?" they whispered. Children ran away from him. Women shook their heads when he passed. Some people believed he was cursed. Others thought he had lost his mind. But no one ever dared to ask him why. And Obiora never explained himself. He simply smiled and walked away. Before we dive into this story, please consider subscribing to my channel, turning on notifications, and letting me know where you're watching from in the comments. One morning, dark news spread through the village. Elder Nwoy had passed away. He was the wisest man in Amici, respected by all. He settled disputes, cared for the poor, and gave advice to anyone who needed it. His death was a great loss to the village. A grand funeral was planned. People prepared food. Women wove traditional mourning cloths, and men built a large canopy for the ceremony. Everyone wanted to honor Elder Nwoy properly. But deep down, they all had the same worry. Would Obiora come? And if he did, would he laugh? On the day of the funeral, the entire village gathered. Everyone wore black. Elder Nwoy's family sat in the front, weeping softly. The priest stood up to begin his sermon. Suddenly, a loud laugh echoed through the air. The villagers froze. They turned and saw Obiora standing at the back of the crowd, laughing so hard he had to hold his stomach. Gasps filled the air. Elder Nwoy's son, Ikenna, jumped to his feet. His hands were shaking with anger. "How dare you laugh at my father's funeral?" he shouted. The villagers murmured angrily. Some called for Obiora to be thrown out. Others wanted to beat him. But Obiora only wiped his eyes and smiled. "I do not mock your father," he said softly. "I laugh because I see what you cannot." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. "What do you mean?" Ikenna demanded. Obiora shook his head. "You will not understand." And just like that, he turned and walked away. After the funeral, no one could stop talking about what had happened. "Why would Obiora say such strange things?" one woman asked. "Maybe he knows something we don't," another whispered. Some people thought he had a secret. Others believed he was truly mad. But Ikenna couldn't let it go. "He disrespected my father," he muttered to himself. "I must find out what he meant." He started asking questions about Obiora, but no one knew much about him. Before Ikenna could learn anything, another tragedy struck the village. A young woman named Amara, known for her kindness and beauty, suddenly died. Her mother wept bitterly, saying Amara's death did not feel natural. Soon, rumors spread. Was it an accident, or was something more sinister happening? A funeral was planned for the next day. "Will Obiora come?" the villagers whispered. "And if he does, will he laugh again?" The sky was dark with heavy clouds on the day of Amara's funeral. Her family sat in the front, crying softly. The priest began to pray. Then, just like before, Obiora arrived. He stood at the back, his face unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he would stay quiet. But then he laughed, louder than before. Amara's mother screamed. "Why are you laughing at my daughter's death?" she cried. The crowd turned toward Obiora, furious and confused. This time, Obiora stopped laughing. His face turned serious. "I do not laugh at your daughter," he said. "I laugh because the truth is near." The villagers gasped. "What truth?" someone shouted. "Stop speaking in riddles," another yelled. But Obiora simply walked away again. Ikenna clenched his fists. "He knows something," he thought. "And I will make him tell me." That evening, Ikenna followed Obiora to a small hut at the edge of the village. He found him sitting outside, staring at the stars. "Tell me what you meant," Ikenna demanded. "What truth are you talking about?" Obiora sighed. "The dead do not rest until their stories are told." Ikenna frowned. "What stories?" Obiora's face darkened. "Your father and Amara were murdered." Ikenna's breath caught. "What? That's impossible." Obiora shook his head. "Their spirits cry for justice." Ikenna felt cold fear creeping into his heart. "You're lying?" "I do not lie," Obiora said. "If you do not believe me, look for the truth yourself." Determined, Ikenna began investigating. He spoke to his father's old friends. An old man named Hugo hesitated before speaking. "Your father was not himself before he died," he said. "He kept saying his food tasted bitter." Ikenna's heart pounded. He spoke to the village healer. "Elder Nwoy came to me for medicine before he died," she said. "But I suspected poison." Ikenna then questioned Amara's best friend. "Amara told me she was scared before she died," her friend whispered. She had overheard something. Ikenna finally confronted the family's housemaid, Neka. At first, she denied everything. But when Ikenna pressed her, she broke down in tears. "It was your uncle, Chidibem," she sobbed. "He forced me to let him into the kitchen. He poisoned your father." Ikenna felt his blood boil. "Why didn't you stop him?" "He threatened me," she whispered. Ikenna and Obiora made a plan. They invited Uncle Chidibem to dinner. As they ate, Ikenna carefully led the conversation toward his father's death. "Do you think someone could have heard him?" he asked. Chidibem's hand shook slightly. "Why would you ask that?" Ikenna stood up. "Because I know the truth." Obiora stepped forward. "We have proof." Chidibem's face turned pale. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he whispered. "And Amara?" Ikenna demanded. Chidibem broke down. "She overheard me talking about the poison. She was going to tell the elders, so I silenced her." The next day, Ikenna gathered the village elders. Chidibem was banished. Later, Obiora sat under a tree, laughing softly. "Why are you laughing now?" Ikenna asked. Obiora smiled. "Because justice has been served." The next morning, Obiora was gone. But the villagers would never forget the man who laughed at funerals.